Good evening, everyone. My name is Marjolijn van Heemstra, and I have the great honor today to introduce and interview Karen Armstrong, who you will hear later. I am a writer and a theater maker living in Amsterdam, and I've been very much inspired by Karen Armstrong. I will tell a little bit about that later. First, I will start by saying that this program is a collaboration between academic cultural platform Spui 25 and Querido Facto publishing house, part of single publishers. And tonight is the opening of the 15th anniversary of Spui 25 with a very well-known guest. I already mentioned her. It's Karen Armstrong. She also gave the annual speech of the opening of the academic year in 2010. Perhaps some of you were there as well. It's a little bit, I have a few minutes to introduce Karen Armstrong, and that's not much, as you might understand. If you read about her online, you find this, she's very much described as the best living author on religion and religious traditions. That's quite something. But she has written many, many books on this subject. And her work has been translated in 45 languages, which is a lot. And also, there have been many international bestsellers. I'm sure some of you have read some of that work. You might also know her for the wonderful project, the Charter for Compassion. It's a charter for compassion that she started and was endorsed by 2 million individuals, and it's made to inspire people to restore compassion, empathy, and kindness worldwide. And worldwide, there's also many communities who already work with this Charter for Compassion. What I really, really love about Karen Armstrong's work is the fact that she shows us in everything she writes how interwoven things are. We are here today to celebrate the publishing of her book. I just heard that we actually have the premiere because the Dutch translation is published before the English version. So it's in Dutch, it's the heilige natuur. I think it's sacred nature in English. I read it the past 2 days, and it's beautiful. Maybe if you've read it too. It's a book about sadness, about humility, about radical empathy, about the world we live in and what to do. It's a book that makes you angry also, but there's some hope in it too. It moved me very much. But actually, the reason I am so honored to introduce Karen Armstrong here today is because she had a huge impact on my life. I will tell a little bit about that. In the year 2000, my mother gave me the book, Een geschiedenis van God. It's probably a history of God. By then I had to choose my studies, and I didn't know what to study. I wanted to maybe go to theater school or art school or do something academic. I didn't really know. And then I read this book, and it moved me so much because I realized that religion is actually theater and art and poetry and everything I loved at once. I went backpacking in the Middle East, and it was before the e-reader, so I took this huge book in my backpack together with some other books about Kabbalah and Islam, and I had about 12 books about religion in my backpack while going to the Middle East. Most of them I sent them home halfway on my trip because they were simply too heavy, but I kept a history of God, and I read it and reread it. When I came home, I even named my goldfish after Ibn al-Arabi. It's the big Sufist that Karen Armstrong describes, the 12th century Sufi. And I studied religious studies, and I graduated in Islamic Sufism in the West. So thank you for that, Karen Armstrong. I really enjoyed my studies, even though there was not much work in Islamic Sufism in the West, but well, I did other stuff, and now I'm here. And I would like to say one more thing. What I love so much about your work is that it's so poetic. And there's always some hint of poetry, or sometimes you actually mention real poets in your work. And when reading this book, I was immediately from the first page on, I thought of Mary Oliver, and then I encountered her in your book, so it was no coincidence that Mary Oliver is a very famous American poet. And so I would like to really introduce you with a quote by Mary Oliver. She says somewhere, "God or the gods are invisible, quite understandable, but holiness is visible entirely." I think that's a good way to introduce you and your book. Thank you.
Thank you. What a wonderful introduction, and what a wonderful crowd on this horrible rainy night. And there's a reason why we always print the Dutch version first, is because after the United States, you're the biggest readers of my books. And the British don't, British are some of the worst. I'm a prophet without honor in her own country, I think. But it's wonderful to be with you tonight. And this is a difficult time in our history, isn't it? Not only do we have Ukraine, we have a looming ecological disaster. And we don't really know what to do about it. We know can't burn fossil fuels, but we still seem to go on doing that. And what can any of us do? Well, I think one of the problems is that we in the West, for many centuries now, have developed a very different view of what we call God from the rest of the world. Let me take you back to China. No, let's go first to Palestine in the 12th century, when crusaders and pilgrims were making the long, perilous journey from Europe to what they called the Holy Land. And when they got there, they were absolutely overcome with emotion and joy. They flung themselves down and wept and tore up the grass with their hands and pressed it to their hearts. And the local Christians, the Greek Orthodox Christians, looked on this with astonishment, puzzlement. What are they doing? Don't they understand that all land is holy, not just this one? And then later, there was another interesting encounter when the Jesuits from Europe came across with their new science. The Jesuits were right at the heart of the scientific revolution of the 17th century. Jesuits were some of the earliest members of the Royal Society in London. And they brought this news, and the Chinese, the Confucian literati, were absolutely fascinated to hear about Copernicus and Galileo, which had caused such consternation in Europe, if you remember. And they were thrilled, but there was one thing that puzzled them. And one writer said they are fine about this scientific stuff, he put it in a slightly different way, but they don't understand the qi. Now, what is the qi? In this book, and in the research for this book, I discovered that I found for myself rather, that we in the West have developed an entirely different conception of God or the divine from the rest of the world. All the other world religions saw God not as something separate, but as a force, a sacred force that infused everything. Qi was the highest religious symbol of China. Qi. It's spelled Qi in English. And it was both physical and spiritual. It was present in every single object, every single person. It ran through the world, keeping it into being, and it produced the gods. The gods were not out there overwatching this. They were part of this key because they were part of the whole world that was coming into existence. And so the idea of the Confucians found the idea of a god, whom the Jesuits said lived in the 10th heaven, in a tiny part of the universe that he had supposedly created. They found this bewildering. But qi wasn't an unusual idea, a peculiar idea of the Chinese. It seemed to me, as I was researching this book, that it was a kind of archetypal idea, because way, way, way distant from China, in India, the people of India were developing a remarkably similar notion of what they called Rita at first. Later it would be called Brahman. And this too was a force that brought everything into being, that brought the gods into being. And the gods were the people who created the world under Qi. They all had a little job to do. It wasn't just one god bringing the world. They all had a little job to do. Interesting thing, though, that when they, say, made the sea, or another one would create the flowers, they didn't then retire to heaven and gaze down on the earth from afar. They dwelt in the thing they had created, so that every plant, every tree, every sea, every river was divine, had a divine core. So God was everywhere. The Tao, similarly, the Tao is this is ineffable in China. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. If you can say what the Tao is, you don't know what it is. This is not it. It's because it is absolutely ineffable. And it too, the Tao Te Ching talks about it alive in nature, that it makes nature grow and develop, and it's present in every flower. It grows, it comes to life in the seasons, it brings them down into the fruits of the earth, all the plants, they die, they feed the earth, and then they come back again. But there is this force coming through right the way. Thomas Aquinas understood this. When in his Summa Theologia, he says, what is God? He said, God is not a being. God is not one of the things that exist. God is esse se ipsum, being itself. That which is in everything that exists, that makes it what it is and forms it. Now, we in the West, when the Jesuits brought all this new science, we were off in the West on a new idea, and we were getting more and more different from the rest of the world, because Judaism and Christianity don't do this. They have another way of equally important, I think. They saw what they call God in the events of history, say in the Exodus from Egypt, which they describe as a divine event. Whatever happened there, it was a sacred event in their lives. And Christians see it in the life and death of Jesus. And this is important too. Especially, I think, especially Christianity, and I think my next book may be about equality. And Christians are very good, early Christianity that is, very good about equality. St. Paul was very good about equality. He didn't write, of course, as I'm sure you all know here, he only wrote 6 of the letters that are attributed to him in the New Testament. The ones that tell wives to be obedient to their husbands were early 2nd century. Paul was for equality, and this was crucial, and this was very important and has been very precious. But we didn't do nature in the same way. The Greek Orthodox did better than we do, because they had a long history in their as it were, pagan life, as Artemis, the goddess of nature, who is everywhere in nature, invisible, but everywhere and everywhere, the same old thing. But our God, became, as we say, our Father who art in heaven. There he is, away from us, and looking down on us benignly, caring for us, but not in the things of nature. And this would have been fine, except that then in the 17th century science took its cue. Bacon, for example, I think a fellow countryman of mine, unfortunately, said that God had commanded Adam and Eve at the beginning of time to take the earth and subdue it. Make it your own, be masters of the sea and the air, etc. And this is our job now, he said. And we can now, Adam and Eve failed, Adam sinned and he was disobedient, and so God's plan failed. But we can now take up this challenge and exploit nature and create a new world. And that is exactly what we've done. But now, of course, we're in trouble because this is not working, and we really have to take this very seriously indeed. We have to struggle with this and accept. If we could somehow try, I think, and revive that view that God is everywhere. That what we call God is in every stone and every tree, and therefore these things are sacred. We must learn to revere them. So what I've done in the book is try to take some of the practices that people evolved in the past and put them perhaps into our own lives in a simple way, because we are very separated from nature these days. How often do you go to a place of beauty, say the sea, and see somebody walking by the sea or a wonderful mountain, chattering into their phones or scrolling through social media? And another thing people do is they see something beautiful and immediately start taking photographs. Instead of being in the presence of this wonderful thing, we prefer a sort of a little visual thing of our own. It's a separation. We're getting more and more separate. We're doing it in almost everything. I was in a restaurant in Singapore before the pandemic, sitting next to a couple who ordered 2 very nice-looking hamburgers, and before they sat down and ate, they both solemnly took out their phones and took a photograph of the hamburgers and laid it down and then started to eat. It's as though almost until it's a virtual reality, we can't really enjoy it. It's time for us now to expose ourselves to nature, to get in touch with it again. And interestingly, things were becoming much worse in the early 19th century, and by our poets, our romantic poets in England, understood this. And one of them was Wordsworth, and I'd like, if I don't have a senior moment, to quote to you a beautiful poem that he wrote, which I think, after you've heard about Ki and Rita and Brahman and Tao, you'll understand. They were very worried. He and Coleridge, his friend Coleridge, were very, very worried about what was happening to us in our separation from nature. As a young boy, he'd enjoyed enormously, had wonderful visions of nature. As a child, a sort of luminous light shining through everything, but then it faded with adulthood, as these things often do. But notice he says 2 things. He says he's learned to look on nature differently. He's taught himself to look at nature in a different way. And I think that if we're serious about saving the planet, this is what we have to do too, learning from our brothers and sisters in other parts of the world. They're learning from us about our technology and science. Let us learn something from them too. And the other thing you will notice that when he talks about this presence that he's experienced, he will not say that it's God. Because we've got, and now at least I certainly had as a child, an image of a God up there, somehow, I know invisible, but somehow distant, and we prayed to him, etc. Wordsworth saying, no, that's not it. So he calls it something. Now, we use the word something, don't we, very, very loosely and carelessly. What do you want? What shall we have for supper tonight? Oh, I don't know, eggs or something, we say in English. But he's saying it's something. I'm not saying what it is. So here he goes. For I have learned to look on nature, not as when he was a young boy, as he was when a young boy, but hearing oftentimes the still sad music of humanity, nor harsh nor grating, though of ample power to chasten and subdue. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and the round ocean, and the living air, and the blue sky, and in the mind of man, a motion and a spirit that informs all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things. Now, isn't that like Ki Rita Tao? And there it is, one of our Western poets able to see that. And we can recover this vision in a way, and I've tried in the book, not in a preachy way, I hope, but to try and find little ways here and there without turning our lives upside down to where we can develop this idea of nature. This needs a little bit of practice. For example, the Chinese have a way of talking about what they call quiet sitting. Now, this is not like yoga. You don't sit in the yogic position with a straight back and cast. You sit wherever you like, in a comfortable chair, relaxed, and you open your mind to the natural world. Turn off your phones, turn off the social media, the radio, and just watch 10 minutes a day, opening and start noticing things in nature. That I've got a tree opposite me in my house. I live right in the middle of London, not much nature there, but this tree has become absolutely to intrigue me because it's a massive tree. We live in an 18th century terrace, and the houses are all 4 stories high. I'm in the top when I'm studying, and there's this tree towering above all the rest of it. And I watch the way the creatures come into it day by day, how it changes with the light changing, how the colors change. And I become really, really fond of that tree. So listening to it, we're not trying to pretend that there's, as we used to say, that there are sort of fairies there or something supernatural there. That each of these things has a life that we don't know about. Just as our lives are one thing, our consciousness is one thing, but the existence of these creatures, of these birds and trees, flowers, the existence of each one is different. And the Neo-Confucians used to say that they were in the 10th century and had a massive revival of both the Golden Rule, but they, instead of treat all people, other people as you would like to be treated yourself, they were definitely up for that, but they also included the things of nature and said that every single thing in nature had what one of the philosophers called a principle. that we had to try and find out and honor, different from our own, a different form of life. That tree of mine has a different form of life from me. Something I can't understand, but I'm beginning to try and appreciate. And so I think that's what I'm trying to do here. Another thing, I'll be finishing soon, I think, and then we can open the thing to discussion. But the word sacrifice, that's one of the ancient practices, and we regard this as appalling, of course, that killing innocent animals in the name of the gods, etc. But the word sacrifice comes from two Latin words, sacrum and facere, which means to make holy. Sacrifice is not about killing an animal, it's about making holy. And we don't turn a hair, or some of us don't, many of us don't turn a hair, when we think of all the thousands, millions of abattoirs in which our animals are slaughtered heartlessly, unceremoniously every day. We have, before we become sort of self-righteous about this, about the animal. But the point was that we know more about ancient sacrifice in India than any other place in the world. And they used to have great rowdy sacrifices, slaughtering beasts in the good old days they were all rowdy and drunk and had very wonderful times bonding with one another. But by the 10th, 11th century, it was a very different thing. And the sacrifice was a very rare occurrence. In fact, the point is you never ate red meat unless it had been sacrificed, unless it had been somehow made holy. But by this time, they were becoming rather worried about the animal. And often they said it would be much better if the animal at the end of all these rituals was given to one of the priests to live a happy life. But each sacrifice had to be paid for by a lay person. And this lay person, he didn't just write a check and say, well, here you are, and hope this goes well. He had to prepare himself, and it could take months, a good 9 months, to prepare himself. He and his wife had to live in a rough hut, and he was going to be taking a spiritual journey to heaven, which meant that he had to be born again as a god. So he had to learn to move as the embryo moves in the womb, and then he'd hobble around like a child as he gradually grew up. And his wife alongside. It took, as I say, it would take a good 9 months. And when he was finally ready, the moment came. And usually they would give the lamb or whatever it was to one of the priests, and it would live a happy life. If he insisted that he wanted the lamb to go to heaven, the lamb would be soothed, petted, and killed by in a quick thing before it realized what was happening, and then it would be sort of shared among the rest of it. But the point was, sacrifice means making holy. And now most of the population couldn't attend these grand services because it was mainly for the aristocracy and for the priests. So, but the priests didn't forget them, and they brought out 6 sacrifices, the great sacrifices, which people could perform every day. And we could do some of these. One of them is put out some food or water for an animal every day, or for a squirrel or whatever, every day. And then greet every single person who comes to your house, whether you like him or not, and greet him and honor him as though he were a king or a god. That's something we don't do. And another thing that they would do they said, study of scripture. Now, this didn't mean they all dived into their Bibles, because most people couldn't read. It simply meant that they had to sit quietly, as I said earlier, and watch the horizon and let nature sink into them and bless them. Bless it. There are many of these lessons that we could all do that. We could all do that in our own lives, putting something out for the birds or squirrels, honoring every single person that comes into your home and saying, "Oh God, no, not that person coming." No, honor him or her, and welcome him, recognizing the divinity within each person, and just again having a quiet, what the Chinese would call quiet sitting and looking at nature, letting it seep into us. Well, I'm coming to the end of my little speech. There's one thing that I love, the Buddha, who we don't think of him as a person concerned with nature much at all. But often, in our prayers here in the West, we're very insular. We're doing our yoga, and we want ourselves to be sort of streamlined and wonderful and peaceful and calm. But the other people are important too, like taking each person into your house, whether you like him or not, whether it's an annoying visitor or not, and welcoming him or her as though she were special. And one day, the Buddha, and you'll find this little prayer he wrote. I can't recite it all, in the back, in the last chapter of the book. And he says, "Let all beings be happy. All beings be happy, small or great, alive or dead, beautiful or ugly. Let them all be perfectly happy. Let our loving thoughts reach across the world, above, beyond, behind, getting away from ourselves, and greet, honoring each thing that we can imagine, whether we like them or whether we don't, but seeing them as sacred and free, our minds free of hatred and enmity, something that in our torn world today we need very much indeed." You'll find that prayer in a whole. I keep meaning to learn it by heart. It's something that you could easily, once you've learned it, say it while you're walking the dog, or washing up, or hoovering, or doing some menial task. But so often we are so preoccupied with ourselves and our own spirituality and our own behavior and our own nation and our own culture, but to reach out to all things, all beings, and that includes the things of nature as well as human beings. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Do you ever fantasize about a completely new religion for this new time?
No.
No? You think everything is there already?
Yes, they've been there before. And we're not so good here. Mm-hmm. But once I've spent my life, at least a good portion of my life, studying the world religions, and each one has its own genius. It has a different take, but the profundity of the similarity is striking.
Yes.
And so, no, I don't think we're capable of it, to be honest.
But you do write in your other work about this phenomenon called the speeltijd. I'm not sure what the X is. Time of. Does anyone know the translation of the
axial age?
Yes, where these huge transformations in cultures happen.
Yes.
And that's the time when new forms of religion spring up. So you talk about this period when Buddhism came up and Hinduism. So could it be that we're in a speeltijd? Is it a possibility, or is it?
I haven't seen any signs of it. Have
No?
you? No.
I'm just hoping.
I'd like
I'm just
to
hoping.
see it. Certainly, technologically, scientifically, yes. We've been to the moon and back, and look where we are in Mars, etc. But look what we're doing to the environment.
Yeah, but I thought because so many religions sprout from a time of unrest and uncertainty, and
yes, they do.
Well, our time is, that we tick those boxes.
What we need to do is not start another religion, but improve our own.
Yeah.
We've got, I don't see a prophet arising, do you? No. There are lots of false prophets, and it's very easy for people in our day and age to sort of become a sort of celebrity, but when you really go into the world religions, they are so profound that we have a great deal to learn, and just as they have learned from us about technology, we have learned things to learn from them too.
And which big religion do you see the most inclined towards the environment, towards the...
All of them. All of them except ours.
And you mean us? You mean Christianity?
Christianity and Judaism.
Okay.
The monotheism, because I may have said this, I'm not sure if I did, instead of seeing God in nature, Judaism, rather brilliantly, and this is important too, saw it in things that were happening. The Exodus from Egypt, for example. Goodness knows what happened there, but it created a myth, and it was a myth of liberation that was essential to their spirituality, and about liberation and freedom, and not being allowed themselves to be oppressed, and following God wherever He led them, even into a desert and through a sea. But there. And Christianity, too, it's the life of Jesus that we focus on.
So it's historical stories.
It's historical, and that's important, too. And and one of the things, I may have said this earlier, I keep talking to people over here. If I say it again, is what Christianity has to teach us, particularly in the early days, is equality. That sense of, in Christ there's neither Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free, male nor female, says St. Paul. And that was as I say, he only wrote 6 of those letters, and later letters try and rein him in and say, wives, be obedient to your husband. Paul didn't have that. When he sent his big letter to Rome, he sent a woman, one of his women disciples, and of course, people didn't just post a letter in those days, and nor did people just read it, because in Greek, the words are all, in a Greek manuscript, the words are all joined together. So you can't read it unless you know it by heart. And this woman would have performed it to the community, and at the end, if you'll see at the end of the Romans, epistle to the Romans, he's introducing this woman to her and saying, this is this woman. And he always praises, was a great missionary couple, very famous ones, Aquila and Prisca. And he always mentions Prisca, the wife, first. She was the more important.
But it was more about social equality, about human equality.
Yeah, and that's important for us today, because we've got rank inequality here. It's one of our major problems. And I think our religions have something to say to this.
Yes.
Islam, interestingly, was... the Quran claims that and Islam claims that the nature, the natural world, is as great a revelation of the divine as the Quran. Now that is extraordinary when you think that he was living in Saudi Arabia, in that ghastly weather, where the Arabs never had enough to eat. They were all fighting one another, not just out because they were aggressive, but for food. And there just was never enough to go round. And here, they're beautiful paeans of praise about nature in the Quran.
And the cosmos and the stars.
Yes, the
Yes,
stars,
yeah.
the moon rises, and nature, everything happens every day, and we should be wondering at this.
And that's also a cyclical way of looking at the world.
Yes.
Instead of the
Also, it's
historical.
beautiful. Now, we don't see the Quran as beautiful because we read it in English translation, and they're often rather dull. But when the Quran, you have to listen to it, and its effect is extraordinary because the sound and the words are so beautiful. Quite often, in Cairo, when you know how hot Cairo is, when there's a traffic jam or something, and the bus stops, and everybody's getting, in these crowded buses, getting very fed up and angry and restive, the driver will put the Quran on the...
Make everyone quiet.
And everybody suddenly
reflective.
starts breathing differently and smiling. And I can't see that happening if bus drivers put on the New
No.
Testament, for
Psalms
example,
or the-
during a
But do you
traffic
think
jam.
that we should get rid of Christianity and
No.
Judaism if we want to make
No, but
nature sacred?
No, we just need to understand other faiths too and
And
extend
incorporate them
yes, into our own practices.
Okay,
and we
so
can give them
enlarge
we can give them because we need equality too. We
Yes,
need
for sure.
we're living. This is not going to be my next book, I think.
Hmm.
That we need to see we need to struggle with the desperate inequality which is becoming we've never achieved it ever in the world. But how can we somehow get through this? I'm going to be looking at that next, and that Christianity is good on that.
Okay.
Very,
but
very
maybe
good.
we have to shine the light on different stories in the
Yes.
Bible.
Yes.
I like what you write in your book that we should actually prefer Job to Moses.
Oh, I don't.
Because-
Moses is okay, but
So he's okay.
no,
But he's
all
had
right.
so much attention already.
But he's fine. I'm all for Moses. But Job is someone we don't often think about.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's the most beautiful poetry in what we call the Old Testament, where Job, utterly self-absorbed as we are, all these ghastly things happen to Job. I mean, it really is unfair. Satan has a bet with God that he'll make Job abandon his moral life, and Job annoyingly goes on being moral, and his wife and children are killed, and his house is burnt down, and he's gets a terrible disease, so he's covered in spots and things. But there he's moaning away. Finally, and he's saying, why are you doing this? Why this isn't just? And quite right, it isn't just. But then finally, God says, never mind that, and shows him nature. And it is the most beautiful poetry in the Bible, the exquisite descriptions of the nobility and sanctity of the animals.
And
Each
he's
one.
actually making Job, sort of teaching him a lesson in humility
And
through nature.
And being wrapped in wonders. So
Yes.
at the end, Job was hardly stopped talking or endlessly moaning away about. At the end of it, he puts his hand in front of his mouth, which was a ritual sign of rejection and acceptance and humility, and says, "I'm finished." And that silence, that he's silent, is the silence we need in front of nature. We're not very good at silence in our world.
True.
We
And
need
also, it's interesting, I think, that we also always use this story of Job. Whenever I hear it, people use it as a sort of a metaphor for endurance.
Yes.
You have to endure all these things, and in the end you will... But never as a metaphor for the beauty of nature.
No.
And there's so much of those stories in the Bible that we could actually lift up.
Yes.
But I'm just wondering if because I was struck by something you said in this reading. You literally said, these little ways without turning our lives upside down. You gave these sort of examples of how we can change our lives in little ways. And I was thinking, would that ever be enough, these little ways?
Look-
Shouldn't we turn our lives upside down completely?
Yeah, probably, but we're not going to do it, really, are we? Let's be honest.
Well, maybe we'll have to in the
Yeah,
end.
exactly, but don't let the end come. I think we've got to change the way we think. And you can't just say, right, from now on, I'm thinking like this.
Yeah.
You have to do it step by step. That's all I'm saying. That
Yes.
these are, and if you give people huge exercises to do, changing themselves overnight, they're not going to do it. They give up after 2 or
Well,
3
especially
days.
not these people, because I was also sorry, and me included. I was struck when I read your book. I thought this is really a book meant for a Western audience,
Oh yes,
isn't it? Yeah.
we're talking. We need to learn from other
Yes.
cultures. Yes.
Yes, and
Just-
also, yeah.
Just as they've learned from us with our technology, they have now in this. Of course, they've been affected by technology now too. They've all got it. And they're polluters as much as we are. Let's sort of forget that. But we need desperately to draw on this inbuilt respect for nature that humanity has and develop it, as
Yes.
Wordsworth did,
Yes.
working on ourselves.
Yes, but for that we definitely need new rituals. You write a lot about ritual in your book as a necessary way to make a myth alive, or sort of bring it into our lives. And I think if there's one thing we really miss in our lives here, it's ritual. Actually, all rituals are gone. And I was wondering when I was listening to you, how important do you think repetition is in this story? Because we constantly look for something new, which is also maybe this historical way of thinking. We need to have marks in our lives, like something has to happen, something. And somehow this ritual is about repeating. It's about, and I'm doing these night walks since a year. I take people into the night to sort of feel the importance of darkness and to make them aware of the necessity of darkness, spiritually, but also ecologically. And we often walk through the same city forest, and it's really tiny. I mean, it's nothing. It's like Vliegenbos in North, It's not like a huge national park. But when you walk through it night after night, all these nights, you see the same trees, and they are different every single night.
That's it.
And I was thinking, how could we, if maybe you have an idea, how can you make people repeat things?
Well, you've just done it. That's a wonderful account, I think. And there you've had this idea, you're doing it. And we can all have these ideas. We're not laying down laws as to what people do. People will be different, and they'll know how their friends feel and what their own environment is like. But I do suggest, for example, at the end of every chapter of this book, a practice that we could just nothing too great, because other people can start off being very enthusiastic about taking something on, and then we get tired. Just few little things every day that can just begin to change our mindset a bit. Yes.
Were you ever angry when you wrote this book?
No.
There's no anger in it.
I am often angry, believe me, but not writing this. It came. I had intended this book to be quite different. I had intended this to be one of my big monster books, huge, these fat things that I write, with showing how, say, each world religion developed in great detail its view of nature. And it was at the beginning of the pandemic, and I had a Zoom call with my editors, my many editors and agents, and they said, no, do a short one this time.
A light one.
Because we need this now, they said, because and something that's accessible. You said you can do the other thing later, but I probably won't. I'll probably go on to something else now. I think perhaps the short is good, but always to give people something to do. Otherwise, people can just leave feeling either baffled or hopeless.
Yeah, true. But I understand, and I liked also the absence of anger in your book, but it was also striking because there's just so much, especially if you address us as a Western audience. We all know who got us into this trouble, right? It's us. And there's so much to be angry about. And sometimes I feel like we're all treated with these satin gloves, like, do a little bit, maybe fly a little bit less. And I'm like,
yes,
just stop doing it.
Yes, but because I get angry too, very much about a whole lot of things, and I find it just makes people seize up.
Yeah.
And I don't think it works. Jesus got angry from time to time. He really did.
That worked.
I'm not sure that it did. He ended up on
Well,
the cross.
true. It worked for many people afterwards.
So, so,
Well, he got his own religion, that's something,
well,
right?
after post-mortem, as it were. So,
He's still alive, yeah.
no, anger is very often associated with ego.
True, totally. Yeah.
It is. It's
Yeah.
with me and what I think, and
Yes.
I want my. And ego is kenosis. That's one of the things that I suggest. Kenosis means emptying.
Yes, yeah.
Emptying ourself of ourself. It's in all the world religions, and it's selfhood that keeps holding us back from real vision. Our obsession with ourself, with our egos, with our relationships, etc. Let it go. Let it go, and I think we're happier. And I suggest, because we're all taught, aren't we, to sort of, make sure that people know about our talents and all. But we all know how little we are at the bottom, and that's why we prance around a lot. And perhaps each night, as a little ritual, I just suggested, we could just think about how little we know, how little each one of us knows about either the world, about literature, history,
Yeah.
but despite our knowledge, our studies, how little each of us knows. Just to push us at one or two other things I've suggested too, just not to make us beat our breasts and say how awful we are. That's a form of ego too. Mm-hmm. But just to say, look, I've still got a lot to learn.
Yes, and empty ourselves. I think that's a very nice practice that you...
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question about what you just said, because I understand it, and I think it's a beautiful practice to do that and to ask that of people. And I think it's also difficult in this time because so much, for example, of women is they should speak out now. You know, you're asked to show yourself because you are, or people of color, or minorities. There's all these movements sort of going. This is big mixture of different streams of things going on, and people asking for equality. And it's hard to match with emptying yourself at the same time.
Yeah, perhaps it is.
Yeah,
perhaps it isn't.
it's
is
very
what
difficult.
I'm saying. No, it isn't.
Oh.
Perhaps it isn't. You see, if we keep on saying, I'm equal, let's just say we're all equal in ignorance, stupidity, and pride. That we're equal in that, and because we're all such stupid, strutting beings. We should laugh at ourselves a bit, I think. We take ourselves so seriously and just bring ourselves down to size in a kindly way, not in I'm done with all the breastbeating and flagellating and stuff. I actually did flagellate when I was a nun, and little good it did me. And so let's just sort of take ourselves as we know. We all have good qualities. We all have failures, bad qualities, fears, loneliness,
Yes.
worry, and realize other people have them too. And the fears that we have, don't let them make us angry, because I think that once you start getting angry, ego comes in.
Yes.
And then
It's just so difficult to navigate because you are asked to, there's this movements of empowerment, of the feminist movement, all these things that ask of a certain, to take up space. And at the same time, this book is also about sort of stepping back.
Yeah.
And
but think of people like Desmond Tutu, whom I knew quite well, who really was a power on the stage. When you meet him, he's the most cheery, funny, serious, unpompous person that you could, laughing at himself all the time. Laughter's a very good thing, I think. We just perhaps need sometimes to laugh at ourselves, because we are absurd creatures in many ways. Rather than saying we're evil or wrong, we're just rather silly sometimes. I certainly am.
Yes, we all are,
yes.
for sure. I was wondering, when reading your book, if you talk about sort of bridging the gap between humanity and nature that we have made here in the West. And then I was thinking, does it also make it more difficult to protect nature if you are part of it? Because now we put it over there, which also makes it easier to put a fence around it and protect it. Once we put ourselves into it, it's a different story, probably.
Well, we are in it, aren't we, whether we like it or not?
Yes.
Well,
at the moment, we are not really, right? We've put it sort of away.
But we're still, we will go down with nature, basically.
For sure.
That's the thing. Just make nature a part of our lives instead of a photograph, is what I'm saying. And let it learn to speak to us. I found the Neo-Confucians in one of the last chapters very, very interesting. They were all high-ranking officials in the Chinese government, but these utterly unpompous men developed a spirituality that said the golden rule: never treat others as you would not like to be treated yourself. It doesn't just apply to other human beings, it applies to what they call the wanwu, the things of nature. Mm-hmm. Now, we use the word thing to mean something that's dead and, not really alive, a thing. But it doesn't mean that in China, because each thing, as I think I probably said, has a principle, something that needs to be looked at. So that the golden rule, which is the essence of all the world religions, the Chinese said we must apply it also to animals, birds, leaves, and the atmosphere.
Yes. Yeah, but then here in Holland, for example, I always encounter the problem that I want to take people into the dark to experience and to feel part of it and part of the ecology of darkness. But almost all of Holland, it's forbidden to go into the dark in natural parks because they want to protect it. So there's already, I think in this society, there's just so much confusion about what nature is and how we approach it and how we protect it also. And sometimes going into it can also mean harming it. So you have to be very conscious of how you enter something. Yes, sure. And like in COVID times, people were all trashing national parks because they all wanted to experience nature all of a sudden.
Yes. Well, yes, but let's just take it gently. Starts with simply looking at leaves and instead of taking photographs of them, and letting nature back into our lives. We've rather expelled it, and that has been that we've treated it as a thing,
yes,
but not as a thing as in the way the Chinese saw it, as something different from us, but each thing precious, and to be explored and honoured.
So I have one more. Can I ask one more question? And then the zaal, yeah. So you write in your book about holiness, heiligheid, and you say that in Hebrew the word for holy, kadosh, means apart. Other. Yeah. And I thought I would just like to hear more about it, because the book is so much about sort of bridging the gap, so to merge with the otherness, and at the same time, while making something holy, you make it other.
Yes. That's the thing. Kadosh, the word other, comes from Hebrew, and for the Hebrews, nature was other.
Yeah.
That's what it was, and when God is also other in the Christian Judaic tradition, it's not in nature. There's Isaiah's tradition, extraordinary vision in the temple, where he sees Yahweh sitting on a throne and the angels crying, holy, 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 which means other, other, other. And interestingly, as one scholar has noted, when Moses sees the burning bush, it's at the beginning of his vocation to lead the people of Israel home out of Egypt and lead them home. And Yahweh is calling him to do this. And he's tending a flock of sheep at the time, and he sees a bush that's burning but not being consumed by the flames, and he goes up to investigate it. And the bush, and God speaks to him from the bush. Now, for the pagans, as we would call them, for the non-Semites, the God would be the essence of the bush. God, it would be inseparable from the bush. It would be the God, this wonderful, beautiful, extraordinary bush is now speaking to you, and it's solely. But he says, no, he allies himself with history, the new God of monotheism. I am the God of your fathers, he says, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah.
And so this is a sort of an other thing. And then there's Elijah. And it took the Hebrews a long time to break away from ordinary religion, seeing God in everything, and they were still worshipping what the prophets called false gods. And Elijah had a terrible trouble with the people of Israel, and he ran away and ran up Mount Horeb, which would later be the mountain where Moses had received the tablets from heaven. And he fell on his feet and waited for God to come. And it's a wonderful bit in the Bible. It says first there was a roaring wind, but God was not in the wind. Then there was a fiery light, and God was not in the light. And so it goes on. And finally, God is finally there in a very, very gentle breeze. God retreating from the storm, the fire, that he would have been seen as in pagan religions, and just about hanging on as a little gentle breeze, and then telling Moses again, "I'm the God of your fathers," and Elijah, and get rid of Baal and all this nature worship, etc.
Yes.
So
that's the holiness that we should no longer pursue, right? The otherness.
God, we shouldn't make it too cozy, because nature, of course, can be really frightening and other to us and scary.
Totally, yeah.
And we can't control it. So nature is other too, has its own otherness, but it's there in every plant and tree, as well as in the heavens. You can have that God in the heavens as well. It's just that in worshipping a distant, a very transcendent God, we've often cultivated a lack of sacrality in nature. That's all. That's all.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. I really agree with your message. I'm wondering, what would your message mean for the challenge we have to make in climate change? How does it change our behavior? Does it help us to feel, if we connect with nature, is the climate change easier then for us?
It should help us. What I worry about when the warnings we're having about frightens us. And we feel helpless and we don't know what to do. And when we're frightened, we don't behave well or positively very often. So what I'm simply suggesting is that we, instead of just saying we must not do this, that, and the other to nature, let's just remember we don't want to do this. Treat ourselves so we don't want to do this to nature, that we revere it, that we know it's sacred and has to be protected, and building up that kind of reverence for nature that doesn't just come overnight. We're not used to this. And we've saved reverence for God often, or other people, or other wonderful human beings. But if we really began to see, as the Neo-Confucians saw, a principle, something precious in every blade of grass, then we would be more careful about nature, about chucking things away and stuff. But also, and it should make us think about driving our cars and aeroplanes if we want to save and preserve this precious thing of nature. Cultivating a sense of care and realization of its fragility. That will save us, because these directives about, they make us afraid and sometimes they make us angry, but we're still not doing it. We're still chucking plastic away, even though we're told again and again that it's ruining marine life. And still our beaches are chocked with this. There's no reverence for the creatures of the sea and the sea itself, which is being polluted and ruined by that. So it's developing an internal attitude towards it that should help us. Just as we wouldn't, with someone we love, we wouldn't chuck stuff at them, yeah. Or with a child that we love, we wouldn't put it in danger in any way. And that's the sort of affection we should feel for nature that would prevent us in a not frightened way. Fear makes people angry and often irrational. It doesn't help.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I was just curious, you mentioned this incident of the Western Christians during the Crusades when they came to Jerusalem. What do you think made the Western Christians different from the Eastern Christians and how they saw nature?
You mean when they arrived in Jerusalem?
Yes.
Because they were thinking that the Holy Land was holy, their own land wasn't. The Greek Orthodox said, your land is holy too. All land is holy. Did you want some more about what was different between the Greek Orthodox? Because I can go on all night about that.
Yeah, do you think the reason why the Eastern Orthodox saw all the land as holy is because they lived in the Holy Land?
I can't quite hear, I'm afraid.
Do you think the reason why the Eastern Christians saw all the land as holy was because they lived in the Holy Land?
Could say it again?
Yes, so the reason why the Eastern Christians saw all the land as holy was because they lived in the Holy Land, and the Western Christians did not.
Well, they were living there, that was their home. I still can't quite understand what you're saying.
Because all they were Christians. All of them were Christians, both the Westerners and the Easterners. So those who lived in the Holy Land and those who did not, right?
All the Christians?
Yeah, so you mentioned the Crusaders, they were Christians.
Yes, they were all Greek Orthodox Christians in the Holy Land.
But there were Catholics who were Crusaders, right?
Catholics?
So the Catholics were Crusaders that came to the Holy Land.
Yes, they came and they killed and slaughtered.
Yes.
It was the first crusade was a terrible, terrible crime. Partly because they were half-starved after an appalling journey. Imagine traveling through the whole of Europe. People died en route and they were deranged, but they fell on... The first crusade was a terrible disaster. They killed so many people that one of the chroniclers said the blood came up to the knees of the horses, and that was on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. So that they were coming because they wanted the Holy Land for themselves, because they were the Christians. This had been a bad idea of the Pope, who was wanting to there were problems in Europe, and he wanted to sort of give them something else to think about. And so he said, why don't you take a crusade and take the Holy Land back and give it to us, because we're the true Christians, and the other Greek Orthodox Christians are not true Christians.
Okay, yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for all the insights of this beautiful evening. I noticed something when you said that, and correct me if I recite you incorrectly, that we can learn from them, I I guess, Asia or different places of the world than the West, and then you say they learn from our technology and they pollute as well, but now we can learn from them. And what strikes me there is that there's a lot of we and them in that message. So shouldn't we start also in our language to abolish what is West, what is we, and what is them, and that we see each other as a whole as well?
Yes, I didn't hear the first of what you were saying, unfortunately. You're the mics
Close.
are rather, I'm not hearing very well. I'm sorry.
So basically my question is, because there's a lot of we and them, and we can learn from them, and they pollute, we pollute too, so
And when was this?
in the part where we can learn from, this new book of yours, I think, is more inspired by also the Chinese wisdom and just
Yes.
different parts of the world than the West.
Yes,
But
they're different from us, but we are all in the same predicament. And I have huge sort of respect for Chinese religion. I'm very interested in the fact that there's a massive Confucian revival, for example, in China at the moment. And I think my whole life as a writer has been to point out the profound similarities in the world faiths. All different, no one of them better than the others. You see, I think I mentioned that my next book might be about equality. And there, I think you have, Christianity is terrific on that. We all have things that we're better at. So I'm quite good at writing things, but I can't cook. My friends have asked me, please, never to cook again. It's not. This is out of sheer charity to them and charity to me. Let's put ourselves through this. I'm no good at it. I'm absolutely hopeless at it. We all have things that we're better at. Sometimes we're better at some things than others, and sometimes we're absolutely hopeless at them. And that's that's what makes it also interesting to make friends and to share things with other people, because there are differences. People will see things. Some people will see things better. I could never do mathematics. Failed O-level mathematics.
But my question is rather about the parts of the world and how we view us and them and West and East and Asia, so that we see each other as a whole. So also in our language, that we stop saying we and them, and that we also start with that oneness that we need to feel with nature, and that you're saying also in our equality, that we also stop saying we and them. Maybe we can also practice that.
I just feel we should learn from them. We've had some knowledge that they haven't got, and we've shared it with them, and now we are going to. We need to learn from them how to treat nature better, because we've neglected it for centuries in a way that they haven't. They can teach us. It's not that I'm averse to these people. I often prefer them to us, and often feel more at home with people in other parts of the world than I do in my own country. England, Britain is one of the worst markets for my books, for example. The British are very good at some things, but they don't do religion. And they think I'm a bit mad, to my friends, to be writing about this stuff. So, us and them, it doesn't mean we're thinking we're better or irreparably separate from one another. We've just all got different things we're good at different things we like, different things we hate. And that's what makes us interesting, to get to know one another, to find out about these differences and learn.
It could be nice to maybe for all of us to think about how we use language, because we also just talked about this kadosh thing, and the holiness in Hebrew, and that means otherness, and how maybe we can also think about a new language to bridge gaps.
Language is always difficult.
Yeah.
We never, ever say what we really mean. And that's why poets are so good. They really wrestle with that, the ability to talk of things that cannot be easily put in words. And a lot of these things that we're talking about, especially in terms of religion, cannot be put easily into words. We are gasping with things that are beyond the grasp of our quick-minded intelligence.
Well, that's a nice sentence to end this evening with. Thank you very much. Most of all, Karen Armstrong, thank you for being here. Thank you, the organization. Thank you.